Since 2009, many people have started making use of Airbnb during their travels across the globe. But as with many hotels and motels, horror often lurks within the walls. As you lie down to sleep, do you feel uneasy? Like someone's watching you? If you enjoy hearing about some of the horrors of Airbnbs, then the following stories are sure to keep you up at night. But for a truly spine-chilling encounter, be sure to watch until the very end of this video. I swear, I am never traveling again. At this moment, I don't even think I want to leave the house, to be honest. I guess I should explain. In July of last year, my brothers and I went on a road trip through Europe. We started in Barcelona, traveled up to Montpellier, then to Lauterbrunnen in Switzerland. From there, we traveled down to Tuscany, where we stayed in an Airbnb situated on this really beautiful farm. This farm is where the horror started. From the moment we arrived, something felt wrong with the place. Beneath its rustic beauty, there was an underlying darkness. None of us could quite explain the feeling, and we all tried to ignore it as best as we could. On our third day there, we were returning from a day trip to Venice. When we got back to the farm, my oldest brother dared me and my other two brothers to walk back to the house in the dark. We didn't want to look like cowards, so we accepted the dare and got out of the car. He drove up to the house, and a stretch of pitch-black dirt road awaited us. We started walking slowly, and we all felt like we were not alone in the darkness. Branches were snapping next to us, and we heard growling. We started running up the road blindly, and we could hear heavy footfalls behind us. After what felt like forever, we finally reached the house and stormed inside, slamming the door behind us. Finally, we were safe. Then we turned around, and we were met by the most horrible sight. My oldest brother was standing there. Tears were streaming down his face. His eyes were wide with terror, and he wasn't moving a muscle. We couldn't see what was terrifying him so much, and we asked him what was wrong. Slowly, he lifted his arm and pointed to the door we had just burst through. We turned and looked out the long window next to the door. I started to scream uncontrollably and ran towards the staircase. My brothers all followed me, and we all somehow managed to squeeze into the closet underneath the staircase. We tried to be as quiet as possible. What terrified us so badly when we looked out the window? You might think I was going to say a wild animal or some horrible monster that could not possibly exist. The truth is that the scariest monsters are human. When we looked out the window, we saw a huge man holding an axe in one hand and a sledgehammer in the other. Both were covered in something horrific beyond words. Even now, my stomach turns just thinking about it. The worst thing, though, was his appearance. He was dressed in nothing but his underwear. His hair was long and greasy and matted, and he was filthy. What made us run screaming to the closet was when he gave a series of short barks and stormed towards the house. As we stood in the closet, we heard him smashing the door over and over and over again. We heard it splinter and finally break, and then we just held our breath as he walked around the house. We could hear him sniffing like an animal. Eventually it got quiet, and we thought that he had left, but we were all too scared to find out. We stayed there until morning. It was only when we heard the frantic shouts of the owner that we came out and saw the destruction that was left behind. I'm a 72-year-old man. I fought in Vietnam and Desert Storm. I raised 4 sons and 2 daughters, and I've been married for 54 years. This should all make me fearless, right? Yet here I am, terrified. My wife and I live in Bayview, Minnesota, in a big house on the lake. Once all our children had grown up and moved out of the house, they suggested that we make a large portion of the house into an Airbnb. That way, we wouldn't have to move out of the house that we so dearly loved, and the money we made from guests would supplement our retirement. So that's what we did, and our house was a hit. We had guests staying there almost every single night, no matter what time of year it was. Then that all changed last week. We had a lovely couple staying in one of the rooms overlooking the lake. The other 4 rooms were also occupied, but this couple was different. On their second night, they asked if they could take us out for dinner, and we agreed. We had a great time talking with them. We stayed until the restaurant closed. They were about 20 years younger than us, but the conversation just never dried up. After we left the restaurant, they invited us over for coffee. We agreed and went inside, and then we stopped dead in our tracks. My heart started racing. My mouth was as dry as cotton, and I barely felt my wife's hand clutching my arm in terror. I spun around, but the guy was standing between us and the door. All of the friendliness had left his face, and he told us to sit down. We slowly turned back around. All of the furniture and the carpet had been stacked up against one wall. The room was covered in candles, and in the middle of the floor was a strange symbol painted with something red. I suspected that it might have been blood. In the middle of this symbol, we noticed some of our personal belongings. Little things like photos, jewelry, a hairbrush, a toothbrush. He pushed us forward and then pushed us down to sit next to the symbol. The woman produced a small dagger and came towards us. She told both of us to stay still while she cut a lock of hair from each of our heads. She turned around and placed the hair in a copper bowl, then added some herbs and dead flowers and leaves. I don't know what else. Then she struck a match and set it all on fire. She was chanting in a language that sounded like it was made up. At least I'd never heard anything like it. My wife asked if they were witches or something, and they both just started laughing. The woman answered my wife with a sinister grin. Witches are harmless. We are not. The man grabbed us and tied us up. He joined the woman and they were both chanting in the same strange language. I felt my eyes growing heavy, and then I slumped to the ground. I woke up to the lights of the police cruisers outside, and a cop was crouched next to me. He untied us both and helped us to an ambulance waiting outside. As we were leaving the room, I saw that a message had been carved into the wall. It was short, but terrifying. You now belong to us. We've sold the house and moved in with one of our kids, but it feels like we're constantly being watched. I'm 28, female, and I travel a lot for work. I used to prefer staying in Airbnbs since hotels always felt so cold and impersonal. One pro about hotels and motels, however, is that there's a lot more security. I found this out in the most horrific way. My travels took me to Madison, Wisconsin. I booked a stay at a lovely Airbnb that bordered a wooded area. I think it was a park, but it looked like a forest when you looked out the back windows. It was remote and quiet, which was exactly what I wanted. It made it easy for me to do my work at night after presenting the whole day. But my experience there has made me rethink Airbnb altogether. I got to the house and checked in. It was a self-check-in deal. I was supposed to pick up the key at the gas station nearby. I unpacked, made myself some coffee, and went to sit on the back porch. It was a beautiful spring afternoon, and this was a perfect chance for me to relax before my first presentation in the morning. While I was sitting outside, I heard some rustling around. I peered into the bushes, and I was pleasantly surprised to see a white-tailed deer emerge. It looked at me with inquisitive eyes, and then slowly walked back into the bushes. It was perfect. It was beautiful. Eventually, I got up and went inside to take a nice long bath. As I was lying in the bath, I could hear some rustling outside again, but this really didn't faze me because I had just seen that deer, so I knew it was just wild animals or something. I was sadly mistaken. What lurked outside was much worse and much more horrifying. I finally decided to get out when the water got cold. I got dressed and climbed into bed. As I walked into the room, I was surprised to see that one of the windows was wide open. I honestly couldn't remember whether the window was open or not when I first got there. but I did know that I had not opened it. I thought maybe the host might have opened it just to let in some fresh air right before my arrival, but that didn't really make sense either. Either way, I closed it and got into bed. As I was lying there, I had this uneasy feeling that I was being watched. I got up again and drew the curtains, then got back into bed, but that feeling persisted. I tried to write it off to just being exhausted. I turned out the light and I fell asleep almost immediately. Then some really strange things started happening. The next morning, when I woke up, both the curtains and the window were wide open. I also had that distinct feeling that things had been moved around in the room. I closed the window and curtains, got dressed, and that's when I felt a chill running down my spine. I was definitely being watched. I could feel the eyes on me, and I turned around in a panic. I noticed that a closet door was open slightly, and that's when I saw someone peering out at me. I couldn't breathe. I was so terrified that I couldn't even scream. While keeping my eyes on the closet door, I slowly started to back away towards the front door. Once I got there, I bolted. I ran to the nearest house as fast as I could and asked them to call the police. When they got there, they went back to the house with me. Yet again, the window and curtains were wide open. And then I came across the most terrifying thing. There were a bunch of Polaroids carefully arranged and spread out over one of the pillows of my bed. They were of me, sleeping. If you thought these stories were scary, then make sure you watch this next video here if you really want to be scared.